to these bones. Give life to these bones. Give life to these bones.
Thank you so much for that lovely song. It's a pleasure to be here with you folks today. It is interesting, as I have traveled to various divisions and all. When I was treasurer of the General Conference, they would usually introduce me as the treasurer, but when I went to the division where my sister worked, this is Jean's brother, which was very appropriate. Now, I want you to know she's my older sister and much older, so, you know, this average of 55 and all, let's just make sure we keep that straight. My younger brother is here also. Wayne is over here, so it's a nice family reunion today. You know, it's interesting because Pastor Mallory, when he asked me to preach, he said I could preach on any subject, but that a sermon on stewardship is always welcome. And then the second time he contacted me, it was the same item again. Any subject you want, but a sermon on stewardship is welcome. You know, it's interesting, though. I'm going to admit something. I've been in treasury work for most of my life, in church treasury work. I've been at conference, union, division, general conference level. And I have very seldom preached a sermon on stewardship. It seems to most people, well, you're the treasurer, you would preach on stewardship. Now, I consider that stewardship is too important a subject to be left to the treasurers. Amen. Okay? Because anytime I speak about stewardship, you think about he's got to balance the budget, he needs some more funds. All you think about is money and the relationship of money to the church. Stewardship is not about money. Stewardship is about money, but not as it relates to the church. Stewardship is about our relationship with God, not our relationship with the church. And so it's because of that that I very seldom speak on stewardship. I speak a lot about salvation, about God's grace, about all the things He's done and what He expects of us. But I very seldom speak on stewardship. I did agree, though, that I would share a few stories about some of our members around the world and the experiences that some of them have in giving and the joy of sharing with their resources with God for the finishing of His work. God doesn't need our money. Amen. And you know, it's interesting, I've on several occasions said, I wish that we could take all the tithes and offering, pile them in a pile, and burn them. I think then we would begin to realize we don't return tithes and give offerings because God needs the money or because the church needs the money. We give it because God has said, this is your way of acknowledging that I'm the Creator. You know, God gave us the Sabbath to remind us that He created us. And He gave us tithing to remind us that He created everything else, not just us. And unfortunately, we too often think of tithe and offerings as something relating to the needs of the church rather than our relationship with God. God's very straight. In Malachi chapter 3 and verse 8, we all know this verse. Will a man rob God? Yet ye have robbed me. But ye say, wherewith have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. And in verse 10 it says, bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house, and prove me now herewith, saith the Lord of hosts, if I will not open to you the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing, that there shall not be room to receive it. You know, we are one of the few denominations, and in my assignments I've had the privilege of working with chief financial officers and treasurers of other denominations in some forums. We're one of the few denominations that makes a very clear distinction between the use of tithe and offering. I don't know if you realize that, but most denominations, they talk about tithe, and once in a while we talk about, well, giving a second tithe. Well, a second tithe doesn't mean a second tithe. It means an additional 10% as offerings. Now, tithe is 10%, and the Lord has said, tithe is mine, saith the Lord. And, you know, it's interesting. Back in about 1996 or so, I went over to Russia. Now, you've got to remember that Russia was under the communists, and they weren't allowed to have church and all of that during that period of time, although things were starting to open up at that point. But they couldn't pay pastors legally during that period of time because pastors, there were nobody was allowed to be pastors, and so they would arrange to make, church members would make payments, and I'll talk about that. But it was interesting. We were trying to persuade them that they should pay payroll taxes on the pastors. And, you know, I came to them with the text, render unto Caesar what's Caesar's and unto God what's God's. And I remember them saying, yes, we believe in the Bible completely too. And if you look at this verse, tithe is mine, saith the Lord. It didn't belong to Caesar. So they didn't want to pay taxes out of tithe, but eventually there were adjustments there. But you know, sometimes we say, well, we give our tithe. We don't, we return tithe. Tithe is not restricted like offerings. It's perfectly appropriate for me to give an offering and say, I want this to go for the school or the church building or whatever. But tithe is returned. It's interesting how when we return something, it's very different than giving. Tithe is a measure of our honesty. Offerings are a measure of our generosity. And we need to keep that distinction. I had a friend or a church member come to me once with a tithe check for $500,000. Had just sold a piece of property for $5 million, and he came with this tithe check, and attached to it he had a little note that said, I want $100,000 to go for this building, and I want so much to go for this, and I want so much to go for that. And I told him, I said, you know, I appreciate all of that, but we return tithe. We don't give tithe. You don't designate what your tithe goes. The Lord says it's mine, and he says what to do with it. We don't designate it. And he said, well, if you don't want to do what I've told you to do with it, I'll just give it to another conference. I said, that's okay. He lived and worked between two conferences. I said, that'll be your choice between you and the Lord. But I said, we don't accept tithe with restrictions on it. Tithe is returned to the Lord. But he was a member of our conference building committee, and we were having I knew him well because we'd been in committees together, and the next week we were having another building committee, and it was just before noon, and I told him, I said, you know, let me take you out to lunch. So we went out to lunch, and he lived a little bit further beyond where we were going to eat, and so I said, let's take our separate cars, and we went our way. And on the way to so that he could just continue on the way there, I took my wallet out of my pocket and I stuck it under the seat of the car. So when I got into the restaurant and after we'd finished eating, I asked him, I said, could I borrow $40 from you? I'll return it to you next week when you're here for the building committee. So, you know, I didn't lie. I had left my wallet out there, and so he loaned me the $40. And the next week, when we got together for the committee, I gave him back two $20 bills. And attached to one, I had a little note that said, buy a model airplane for your son. And the other one, buy some flowers for your wife. And he looked at that and he says, you can't tell me what to do with my money. I said, well, last week you wanted to tell the Lord what to do with his. He says, okay, I get it. And so he turned in the tithe that he had appropriately. I've been fortunate as I've traveled around the world. And you know, there's been a lot of discussion here in North America, because I think you've had the stewardship director here recently mentioning about where you return your tithe. To me, when you return something, the only question is to look at the contract and see where you return it. We have a mortgage on our house, and we got it from one bank, and another bank bought out that bank, and another bank bought out that bank, and we keep having to get a new address to send our money to. But all we do is look and say, where are we supposed to send it? We don't say, oh, I don't like this new bank, you know, their reputation isn't good and I'm not going to send it to them. So when you're dealing with your tithe, look at what the Lord says about where you return your tithe. Okay. I've had the privilege over the years to visit many different parts of the world and live in some other parts of the world. Russia has been a fascinating place to visit over the last 25 years. Many of you know the stories about the work in Russia. I'm sure you've heard, you know, they were not able to bring Bibles, Ellen White books, and Sabbath school lessons. And so many of them would type Ellen White's books or the Sabbath school lesson, and then they would distribute it to the members. And I've got a copy of one of the type. This is Steps to Christ in Russian. Maybe somebody could take this and just start it around. You can all take a look at it, just make sure it gets back to Gene or the pastor or myself at the end of church. But it's interesting because it was fascinating to go and talk to some of the people who actually did that typing. Now, I don't know how many of you took typing class. They don't do it anymore. It's now keyboarding. For those of you younger generations, it's keyboarding. But when I went to school, we had the old Royal typewriter, and you had to really punch down to make those keys go, not the nice little Selectric with the little ball that would pop around. These folks had to type on those hard type, and they would type 8 to 9 copies with onion skin paper and carbon paper. Now, on my computer, I make lots of mistakes, and it comes up red, and I just click on it, and it corrects the spelling. You know, they had to type right. So look at that and see if you could type those pages without very many mistakes, because you don't erase through 9 copies of carbon. But it was interesting when I was discussing with them, they said, you don't want the first copy. The first copy will have all the O's and the D's and the P's cut out, because when you hit hard enough to go through 9 copies, it's going to cut through the paper on the first couple of them. So that's copy number 3, so you can get an idea. You have to put a piece of paper behind it to be able to read it, and that's why there's a white sheet of paper there, so that because it's such thin paper, you're seeing the next pages. But it was a fascinating time to be able to spend and talk to these, and yet 25 years later, it is surprising how fast the next generation has forgotten what they went through. Sherry and I were over there a year or 2 before I retired, and I took the time to go and visit with the treasurer, which would be like the union treasurer of our church during that Russian time. We went with his son and for several hours driving, and it was fascinating talking. His son was one of the ones that typed these books. He also told us stories about he and his brother going to try and get onion skin paper. They could only buy 1 or 2 reams at a place, or the people would suspect they were doing printing, and so they would travel long distances, and the police would be watching them. But the fascinating thing I found was how they dealt with their tithes and offerings. Our members were still extremely faithful in returning their tithes and giving their offerings. But they couldn't have a treasurer, and they couldn't have bank accounts, and they couldn't have any of that. And he said for years his dad and mom would replant. They had about 40 potted plants on their porch, and they would replant every 6 months, take them all out, put new dirt in, and plant them again. And he says, as kids, we couldn't understand that. And every year we had to climb 3 or 4 trees and get these birdhouses down. And he said, you know, they needed repair, they needed to be fixed up. And it was only years later that he found out that in the bottom of each of those potted plants was each local church's money. Okay? And in the birdhouses, there was a false bottom in it, and in there was the money for longer-term projects. Okay? And our church treasurers, and I use that, they couldn't meet, I mean, they met very irregularly and not as a group and breaking up, but they would still, they had a numbering system. The treasurer would have the number of the church, and then the number of the member, and then the number of rubles that it was. But they didn't put cents on the rubles or anything. They did it just to be able to, so they had this little book, and this pastor had the same records, and they would go different ways and get different places, and when they came together, almost always the amounts and the amount of money brought exactly matched what were in those little numbers. But if they were stopped by the police, those numbers meant nothing. They were just a series of numbers in their books. God's people have gone to great extent, risked their lives to be able to return a faithful tithe and give offerings. Too often we, who can give our offerings and our tithe in 1,000 different ways, from the internet to mailing it in to and get tithe receipts for it and all, we don't appreciate the privileges we have. But there are other tithes and offerings procedures. I don't know how many deacons do we have here in the congregation right now. How many of you are serving as deacons? Okay. When I was working in the Congo, one of the jobs in the rural areas, one of the jobs of the deacons was to go out at harvest time, because it wasn't a cash crop, it was a agricultural economy in the area that I was working there. And the deacons would go out at the harvest time, and you would divide up the gardens into 10 plots. And you try to make them kind of equal, and you number 1, 2, 3, and then they draw lots as to which one was tithe. So that was one of the jobs of the deacons, was to draw. I went with a couple of times when they were calculating the tithe on livestock. Now, if you go to the scripture, how does it say to calculate tithe on livestock? It says to get them all in a pen, run them through, and every 10th one is tithe. I have prayed extremely hard when I was standing there with the stick. I remember this one widow lady, she had virtually nothing, but she had about 15 chickens, 2 or 3 goats, and a couple of calves. And that was the increase for the year. And I remember praying, Lord, now as they come through, I want 2 chickens, Lord. I don't want any cows. This lady cannot afford to give tithe of a cow, when it's just the chickens. But I remember one of the ones was a chicken, and then the second one was a cow. And, I said to the Lord, why, Lord? And yet I couldn't believe her joy. She was going to be able to give as her tithe the most precious thing she had in her livestock. And yet, so many of us have so many reasons why we don't have enough. In 2007, I got a call from the chief financial officer or treasurer of another denomination, a small denomination located with their headquarters here in the United States. And he called me up and he said, they were starting some mission schools, a couple of mission schools in Africa, and had some churches there and a mission program, and also some of their issues of their church here in the States. And he had been talking to some other denominational vice presidents of finance and said, who has a really good system that deals with missions and deals with various things? He said, you need to go to the Adventist Church. So I have no idea. I've never asked him to this day, and I got an email from him just the other day, actually the day before yesterday. He was over in Kenya. But they came down, and he came down. They brought what would be their education director in charge of their schools. They brought their legal director, who was in charge of their legal stuff, and a couple of other folks, and spent the whole day with us. And we got together our treasury team. Steve Rose was under treasurer at the time, and myself, and we spent a lot of time with them. We shared with them working policies and all of that stuff and how our mission program works. And it was interesting because they then invited us to come up to their headquarters. And Steve and I went up to their headquarters and spent a day. And they had us meet with a number of their people there. And Steve and I couldn't understand. Every once in a while there'd be a reference, well, we could do that if it wasn't for the curse of the endowment. We could do that if it wasn't for the curse of the endowment. And I said, since when's an endowment been a curse? Yeah, I mean, no money. It's not really been a curse to me. At lunch, when he took us out to lunch, Steve and I asked him, said, what's this curse of the endowment? And he said, well, you don't understand. Our church, just around the turn of the century, 1901, 1902, one of our members was one of these high tycoons that, I don't forget if it was oil or railroads or what, but was big money. And when he died, he left his whole estate to the church. He left enough money that their church members didn't have to return any tithes or offerings, didn't have to pay anything for their schools, didn't have to put any finances into the church, and they lived off the earnings on the endowment. And he says it has been the biggest curse to us that there possibly could be, because our members have gotten selfish. Our members don't want us to expand our school because maybe we couldn't then pay for everything out of the endowment. They might have to pay some. They don't want us to start overseas schools and spend any money there. The curse of the endowment. He says there's no tight attachment to the church because they aren't giving anything. They're only receiving. Everything is just receiving. Steve and I drove home that day. That evening. Well, before it was finished that afternoon, the president of their denomination met with us and the whole group for a little while. And I will never forget his question. He said, we've done research on your church and our church, and in 1900, we were both the same size. And both of us have profits. And 107 years later, we're the same size we were in 1900. And you folks are already up to 15 million members around the world. He said, why? Try to answer that. I had already gotten much of the answer from the treasurer who had explained to me about the curse of the endowment. We drove home and Steve and I said, don't know what the Lord was trying to tell us, but certainly endowments for schools, for tuition, fine, but the regular church with tithes and offerings, we don't need to do it with endowment. About 6 months later, we were contacted by one of our church members' families that had sold a very big business. And they were wanting to return the tithe from the business. They had been returning their tithe to the local conference all the time. Their business was in multiple conferences and various parts of the world. But they wanted to turn in their tithe to the general conference because they were afraid if their tithe was turned to the local conference, it would destroy the local conference, the very thing they had spent their lives trying to build. It was enough tithe, over $100 million, to exceed the total conference tithe for a number of years. And they said, we can't destroy God's church in our area in that way. Now, the GC doesn't accept tithe. I mean, if it does, it sends it back to the local conference anonymously. But in this particular case, we spent time studying it and agreed that, yes, this was probably appropriate, that it be used for the world field in a very special way, because tithe isn't used for building buildings. Tithe is used for support of the pastoral ministry and support of evangelism. And so we accepted that tithe. And the very first message I got from one of our leaders was, let's set it up as an endowment, and let's start and build an endowment to where The General Conference won't need any tithe percentage or any money from the rest of the church. It can simply operate on that endowment. And Steve and I both said, thank you, Lord. Thank you for having given us an experience that taught us very clearly. The Lord didn't give the widow a full barrel of flour or oil, flask of oil. Every day had to depend. And so we did not move that direction of going with an endowment at all. We used the money. But it was quite something to see how this family returned their tithe. Got an envelope with 4 checks in it. This $100+ million was not through bank transfer, was not through CPA's office. You know the little checks that you write for your garbage collection? You know, the little ones that women carry in their purse and men have one folded up in their wallet in case they need a check sometime? No. They were handwritten checks. And I remember holding one in my hand, $35 million, handwritten. And one word on it, down in the description column, tithe. I took it down to our controller of Earl and Ernson and said, I want to watch as you deposit this. Now, we did not go to the bank to deposit checks. I don't know, you've been to grocery stores, you give them a check and they put it in a little thing and it scans it, choom, goes to the bank and it pops up on a teller's screen and the teller clicks in OK and it's deposited to your account. We did that. I would love to have been at our bank when these 4 checks came up. I can guarantee you that the individual there doing the teller doing that did not just push, click, deposit to our account. I'll guarantee you the manager was called. I'll guarantee you they were on the computer looking up on Google what tithe is. Simple faith and simply thanking the Lord and saying, I will be honest. You know, it is such a testimony to us. I've been to other places. I was to India, and I remember I was in one conference in India, and one of our folks there said, we don't promote tithes and offerings here. Our people are so poor that, we just can't ask them to turn in anything. And I said, you have to be kidding me. You want them to stay in poverty the whole rest of their life because you don't want them to have the blessings God's going to give on them from their tithes and their offerings. God didn't say, if you're rich, turn in. God said it's 10% and then there are offerings. You know, I've often wondered, God doesn't bless all of us with great riches, even though we may be very faithful in returning our tithes and giving offerings. I'm not sure he can trust all of us. And I'm honest. I want you to sit down and think, if all of a sudden today you got a message that said you've just, from a relative who's gotten $500 million in cash, it's yours. Or we don't play the lottery, but you won the lottery, but you have it. If you had $500 million, $100 million, $1 billion, would your children end up in the kingdom? I'm seriously asking. Would your children end up in the kingdom? Would you end up going through those pearly gates? What does the Bible say about riches? Very, very difficult. God can't trust a lot of us, and that isn't negative, but God knows, and God's greatest desire is that we be saved. His greatest desire isn't that we be rich and that we be comfortable. I've thought about it. I don't know, I'm sure some of you have too. I've thought, well, if I got $100 million, first thing, I'd give $5 million to our son and $5 million to our daughter so they wouldn't have to worry about, and then, of course, first would be $10 million in tithe and then some other. But you stop and think of it. Would your children be saved? And would you be saved? God has made it so easy for us to receive His grace, to receive the blessings that he has in store for us. In closing, and I hope you don't mind if I run a few minutes over, because I'm used to preaching in parts of the world where they only start at 12 and end at 2. By the way, I saw in the bulletin 12 o'clock, so I thought that was the beginning. I love the story of Noah and his carpenters. If you look in the book of Genesis, I don't know if any of you have thought about how fast Genesis goes. I mean, if you start in chapter 2, you've got the creation, chapter 1 and 2, and then you get to the sinning in chapter 3, and then drove out of the garden, and then in chapter 4 and 5. By the time you get 2,000 years down in the earth's history, you're only in chapter 6 of Genesis. But we all know the story well. Adam and Eve had sinned. They'd been kicked out of the garden. The world had gotten more and more and more sinful. And we finally got to the point where our memory text for today was in Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 to 8. The world had gotten so sinful that God said, I'm going to destroy everything. But it ends in verse 8, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And then in verse 13 it says, and God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me from the earth, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make thee an ark of gopher wood, rooms shalt thou make in the ark, and shalt pitch it within and without with pitch. And then he goes on to give the plans for building the ark. My wife and I, most houses that we've owned, we just bought the house, but we built a house when we were in Canada, and I remember we had a whole bunch of plans from the builders, from one of the building companies, and we were trying to, how big is the dining room, and, setting them out. And so I can picture Noah and his wife, and I don't know how it was, but I picture them that night at the dining room table, looking at the plans for the ark and saying, this room and this. I don't know how it was, but I picture Noah living on a hillside. Maybe that's because the Bible storybooks have the painting of the ark being built on the side of a hill, and Noah with a pile of wood out there preaching. But Noah had to hire carpenters. Noah must have been a rich man, but he couldn't do the job, he and his wife alone. They were 480 years old at this time. They didn't have any kids yet. If you read, they started having their kids at 500 years of age. So Noah and his wife had to hire carpenters. Now, I don't think they just put a sign down at the village center and said, carpenters needed, report at Noah's house 8 o'clock Monday morning. I don't think that's the way it worked. When I was in college, a friend of mine and I decided we wanted to build an airplane. Both of us were pilots. And so we got plans from a Popular Mechanics for an all-aluminum plane, and it was had a modified Volkswagen engine. In those days, they didn't use these snowmobile engines like they use now in ultralights. And so he owned 2/3 of it, I owned 1/3. His dad has a garage that we could build the plane in. He had a cousin who was going to the University of Maryland who was taking his master's degree in aeronautic engineering. He wasn't a pilot, but he was far better than we were at the mechanics and all. So we started to build this plane. And we were both in college and working, but on weekends we would work on this. And it's not like building a house a house, but like building a go-kart or something. You have to have the FAA come and inspect. You have to keep a logbook, every bolt that's put on. You have to put on lock washers and lock nuts, and you have to, where the pulleys go and all the things, and you put it in the logbook and you sign your initials by it. And we worked down through, and the inspectors came multiple times and would look at it before you could go on to certain stages. And we got down to the last week. We had passed all the inspections, and we were told we could now fly it if we wanted to. The wings were still off. You had to attach them because we had to take them with a trailer to the airport, but everything else was fine and we didn't need any further inspections, and so we planned the next week to do our first flights. I will never forget when my friend came over one evening to my grandfather's place and grandmother. I was living with them at that time. They were across the street from the college there in Washington Adventist University now. And he came to me and he said, "Some of my friends have been talking to me. And since you have about 3 times as many flying hours experience as I do, I think you should fly the plane first." Now, let me tell you, up till that time, I had no concerns because we had agreed he owned 2/3 of the plane and I owned 1/3 of the plane. He would fly it first, I would fly it second. When he left, I went out and got in my little Volkswagen Beetle and went over to the place, opened it up, turned on the lights, and went to the logbook. Now, you know, when I went through that logbook, I didn't look at any of the parts that I had done because I knew I had done it right because I was going to be in that ark. I didn't look for my friend's initials because he was going to be flying that plane. I was looking for his cousin who was far better qualified than we were to build the plane, but he wasn't going to fly in it. I was afraid one Sunday when he wanted to go to a Washington Senators baseball game with his girlfriend that he had forgotten to put on one of the lock washers or something and it was going to come apart while I was up there flying. So I checked everything out. You know, when Noah chose his carpenters, I don't believe that he chose them based on who were the best carpenters. He wanted good carpenters. But he chose them based on who was going to be in the ark with him, who he believed and who promised to be in the ark with him. Because then he didn't have to worry about the work, whether they put a piece in that had a bad spot in it or a knot or whatever. I believe that Noah's carpenters agreed that they would be in the ark with him. I picture them doing the building the ark, 120 years, that's a long time. I think a whole neighborhood, I mean, just like around an institution here, a whole neighborhood of people develop around it. And I picture all the carpenters. I mean, if you're going to work 120 years in a place, you better live close by. So I see them building their houses, raising their families. I picture Noah every afternoon, you know, getting up and preaching to the crowd. I think it became a vacation place where people would come, go see that old crazy man building a boat up on the top of a hill. And he would preach, and I can see him pleading with the Lord, "Lord, just a little bit of a sprinkle, maybe one clap of thunder, and the people will start to listen." They're not listening. But then it came down, and the ark was finished. And God said, "Tomorrow you're going to go into the ark." Can you imagine what that was like? All of a sudden, everybody's attention is there. Tomorrow Noah is going to enter the ark. God says the world's coming to an end. I don't know what it was like, but I picture Noah standing there on that big gangplank, pleading with the people to come in and be saved. All they had to do was walk into the ark to be saved. And I'm sure he called out his carpenters one at a time, name by name. I don't know how it was, but I picture them over there under a tree. They had talked this over 100 times already. They didn't want to be embarrassed. You know, what if there was no flood? They would be scoffed at and run out of the neighborhood. So maybe they agreed, we won't go in tonight with Noah. We'll go home, tell everybody we're going on vacation, and then when it's dark, we'll sneak back over, help Noah close the door, and if it doesn't rain, we'll wait till it's late at night, open the door, sneak out, go back home, and tell everybody we came back from vacation. We don't have to, we don't have to worry about being embarrassed, etc. Then all of a sudden the animals start coming in, 2 by 2, 7 by 7. I don't know what it's like, but I'm sure there was a fast lane for the elephants and the giraffes and the, and the camels, a smaller lane for the dogs and the sheep and then this little lane for the caterpillars and the inchworms. Can you imagine how long it took them to get in there? And I can see that little termite coming up and Noah saying to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do we have to take this termite on board?" But all of these are going in. And then Noah makes his last plea. And of course the people say, well, when in the afternoons when Noah was gone and you thought he was going sleeping, he was down there training these animals, so this is nothing unusual, don't be worried about it. Then all of a sudden his carpenters saw that door go shut. And they knew Noah couldn't close it. They hadn't built a block and tackle into it. Took 11 of them to lift one end into the hinge of the thing. What do you think Noah's carpenters felt like? They knew Noah didn't close that ark. The first night, I don't imagine they slept at all. They were at their window watching out. Second night, third. By the fifth, sixth night, they were out there with the others, scoffing at Noah. And then came the rain on the seventh day. They were the first ones to the ark because they lived the closest, pounding on the door and saying, Noah, Noah, please let us in. Noah couldn't do anything. He couldn't open that door. He couldn't let them in. They were so sure that they knew that time couldn't end unless they were involved. They were sure that they knew how everything was going to work. And the rain started to pelt down, and they were lost. Just think about Noah's carpenters. 20 feet from being saved, and only because of the pressures of the world and society and that, they were willing to give up being saved in the ark just because of that. God didn't choose us to give his gospel to the world because we were the best preachers, because we were the best local church members, Sabbath school directors, teachers, because we were the best witnesses in the community by our lives or by... He chose us as opposed to the angels because we planned to be in that ark of safety. How many of us are losing the vision that we had, that Jesus is coming, and that nothing here on this earth means anything if we lose eternity? The Bible says in Luke, remember Lot's wife. I say, remember Noah's carpenters. God has made it so simple and so easy for us to accept his grace and to live under his power. Or will we be like Noah's carpenters, spend our whole life building the ark of safety for the last days, and yet fail to go in? My prayer is that none of us will hear those words that are so sad in the Bible where it says, many will say unto me in that day, Lord, Lord, have I not prophesied in your name? And in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful things. Then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye workers of iniquity. My prayer is that not one of us will be missing when that great ark of safety, the door closes. May God bless each one.
Thank you, Bob. Before the closing hymn, I just wanted to bring something to your attention. First of all, the message today, do you think God spoke? Amen. I think he did. And if you're anything like me, when you hear a message like this, you want to respond today. One way you can respond by being faithful in your tithe and offerings. If you haven't already, there's a brown box back there. You can return your tithe that way or an offering today before you leave. Also, if you'd like to go online, you can do it online. Our treasurer, Doug Prude, tells me quite a few of you are doing that online. Whatever means you want to do it, just do it, because if the Spirit of God is speaking to you to do it, you should do it. Amen? Amen. Oh, that's a mighty weak amen. If God is speaking to you that you should do it, right? The blessing comes when you respond. I'll say it again. The blessing comes when you do what? When you respond today. And I like what he said. You may not consider yourself well off, but God still wants you to be faithful. The blessing is still there, and God wants you to be blessed. And so the brown box also today, if you've made a decision to follow Christ or just want to say something about what God is speaking to you about today, you can take advantage of the card in front of you in the pew, and you can put that in there also. I will bring your attention to the bulletin today. Bob's song that he's chosen, 522. It's a really good song. But before I introduce that, I just want to take a second here to thank those people that work for our church and school, our secretaries. Wanda's up there. I want to thank Wanda and Katie. These things, bulletins don't just fall from the sky. People put some time and effort into this, and so we've got a wonderful secretarial team over there at the school that also blesses the church, and this was the week that we recognized them, and I want to say thank you publicly for what they're doing to help our school and our church. But the hymn that he chose today, and we're going to sing it together, is 522. And Bob, I like what you chose today. My hope is built on what? Nothing less, and finish it with me. You know it, don't you? It's there. The message is in the song. After the song, I'm going to come and pray, and then after that, I wanted to invite all the men of the church. Adam Conley is our men's ministry leader. He wants to meet with you, myself, and Marty Miller's here today. We've got some really interesting things we want to share with you. So if you're of the male gender, stay by just a little bit. We promise we won't be long. So please stand with me as we sing 522. My hope is built on nothing less. Let us pray. Yes, Father, the message of the song rings in our heart today. When he shall come. Someday, Jesus, we know you will come. And we think that day is soon. And so thank you so much that you've given us time, even though we don't have a lot of time. There's no guarantee we have tomorrow. But we thank you that you've given us the time that we have. May we use our time wisely. May we think of, Lord, eternity and never forget that someday the world as we know it now will end and Jesus will come and he will take his people home. Remember the carpenters when they were building the ark. Yeah, the message came through loud and clear. May we respond today by saying, Jesus, yes, we want to be on board. We want to make sure that we're secure in the ark of safety. So when Christ comes again, we'll all go home. Thank you for making that possible through your grace. We love you, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen.